I'm Tony Williams, and welcome to Brooklyn Savvy. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the prison industrial complex with Avery Irons, and you're from the Children's Defense Fund, Avery,
Correct,
right?
yes.
And we're also going to be speaking about the Innocence Project with Maddie DeLeon. So thank you two ladies for joining us. And before we get started in this riveting discussion, I'd like to introduce Tracy Smith, Denise Arbisu, and Ellen Salpeter. Thank you so much for joining us. So when we look at what is going on in the United States today in prison culture, I guess it is, about 2.5 million people right now are in some form of incarceration. And I think there are about 7 million that are on parole or some form of probation or something of that nature. Comment on the prison industrial complex and how that relates to some of these very high numbers that we're seeing.
Definitely. There's this long-standing notion in our country that prisons are places where people go to pay their debts to society, and that's their only role. However, there is the lack of recognition of the current role that prisons can play in many communities, in the sense that prisons aren't just places where people go, they're places where people are employed. They have become the livelihood of communities around the country, in rural neighborhoods, sometimes in urban areas. They are places, everyone that's associated with the prison is paid. If you deliver the food to the prison, there's someone that has that contract. If you're cleaning the prison, someone is getting paid to do that.
Post-industrial economic recovery plan.
Exactly.
Or some would call it the new Jim Crow.
Yeah.
Michelle Alexander would call it.
Right.
But I think it's also the point to realize that prisoners or people who are incarcerated are also doing work while they're in prisons, and they're making products for companies that people would probably be surprised to know that they are paying a lot of money for a product, whether it's something from Victoria's Secret or something for the Gap, that is actually being made by a prisoner. They're paying lots and lots of money for a clothing article.
And are the prisoners
And
compensated
right.
for their
They
time?
receive very small compensation, talking a few dollars a day, if that.
So not minimum wage.
Yeah,
They
definitely
can't even
not.
afford cigarettes anymore with that wage. There used to be sort of a...
Right, but when we look at it, that's part of, unfortunately, being in prison, Now, I've been looking at, in my research, it seems as though the number of women that are incarcerated has really grown. What is driving that particular, that research and that statistic?
Drug arrests.
Oh, drug arrest.
Yes. I think everyone thinks that women who could be used as mules, women who may be selling small amounts even, but women who may just be possessing small amounts. I think
But women
historically...
don't do drugs or sell them in any larger number than men, do they?
I wouldn't be able to answer that. My guess is no. I think you have to note that while the rate of women is going up, it's not like 50-50.
Right.
It's just there's been a drastic increase in the rate of women that are incarcerated over the past decade, and a lot of that's being filled by low-level drug
changed?
crimes.
So you're saying it's low level, but what about the whole issue of sentencing? I guess right now what we're seeing, it seemed to me in the past, women sometimes got off light, at least that's what some of the things I've been reading, because they were mothers and that kind of thing. All of that seems to be out the back door now. Or did it ever exist?
Or did it, mandatory sentencing? Or?
I would say part of that's it. If you have, mandatory sentencing, but also the need to fill this prison industrial complex. If you have prisons that need people,
So it's marketplace.
So you're saying that there's so many available beds that have to always be filled in order to continue with the whole business of prison. So to employ the people,
Do we have a dollar value?
Do we
of the
exactly? Do you
prison
risk
industrial complex anywhere? I'm so curious.
it would be, you'd have to look nationally, or you could look. I know a couple years ago it was about $44,000 to keep one person incarcerated for 1 year in New York State. If you look at juveniles, young people, it's actually upwards of $250,000 to keep one young person.
So this is yet another assault on poor people. That's what it's. That's what
Yes.
that's
Because there's an incentive now to put our children into prison and our family members into prison if you're profiting from it.
I think we have a much less tolerant society. I don't know, maybe it was always intolerant, but it seems like, when we get to the Innocence Project, we'll really talk about kind of social mores and what people think about people who have committed crimes. But it seems like you get put away, mandatory sentencing, just all of that. We're not about rehabilitation or any...
Mandatory sentencing is only for adults in New York State. So
and that's
young
for
people
someone
don't apply.
18 and over?
16 and over. In New York State, we automatically try 16-year-olds as adults.
But we're also not talking about, what we're doing on the front end versus on the back end. So, are we educating our children? Are we providing better social services for our families so that we can avoid actually spending the money in the prison system? And the answer to that, I would presume, is no.
Right. I would say no. There's a lot of things, or a lot of studies have been done around the country looking at things, especially if you look in New York, called $1 million blocks, where you have, if you look at a specific block in a community, let's say I live in Brooklyn, say Brooklyn, there can be at one time so many people that are somehow involved in the court system. They're either incarcerated, they're on probation, or they're on parole, and in one block that adds up to $1 million. So you start to ask the question of on the criminal justice system.
That whole system.
So it's a question of what could we do for all those families on that block with at least that $1 million. You could stop the vicious cycles that in many cases are keeping people in the system.
This information is rather infuriating because, I mean, it really is. I mean, we're sitting here talking about it kind of casually, but what we're talking about is the fact that there are people that, are, I'll say it, railroaded into this system. And then they're not given the opportunities that the rest of us are in terms of being able to be gainfully employed and that kind of thing.